Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Hey, everyone. It's Lynda, your host of the Pilates Goddess podcast, and here we are once again for yet another episode. Now, last week's interview with Greg Youdan brought up a lot of questions for a lot of people. And some of the questions that I've been getting have a lot to do with internal versus external cueing. And this is, I think, an interesting discussion for Pilates teachers and for yoga teachers and personal trainers. I also think that this is an interesting discussion for folks who move and do Pilates or do yoga or go to the gym and work with the trainer, because we tend to sometimes focus on things that seem like they're really important to exercising, but really aren't. One of those being where we feel something or how we feel something. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that, specifically in the context of, Pilates, and maybe a little bit about weight training, since that's what I teach primarily. But I do think this will be of interest to many of you who regularly listen to the podcast. So when I first started teaching Pilates several decades ago, I used to cue a lot of internal cues. And let's define an internal cue versus an external cue. So an internal cue maybe has to do with what you're engaging or what you're feeling, or what's tense and what's relaxed, or what you might feel working versus not working. Whereas an external cue is more like point your foot towards the ceiling, or drop your sits bones down towards the mat, or look at me while you're doing this exercise because I'm standing in front of you and that's the position I want your neck to be in. And what you may notice, and something that's extraordinarily frustrating actually at the beginning of a Pilates teacher's career, is that many of your clients don't actually feel the exercise where you think they should. And that's an issue. So I'm going to give you a few examples, as I usually do, from my own body and from my own exercise practice. The other day, I got down on the mat and decided to just, do my regular old mat work. And I think I've discussed, recently that I have a kind of left knee thing and I've got a little left meniscus injury. I've been doing, my strength work for that. I've been doing my squats. I've been doing my leg extensions. I've been stretching. I'm doing all the things that I should be doing for this. But I got to single leg circle. Now, I think we all know single leg circle is a beginning, I dare say, a basic Pilates exercise, right? And we know that we can modify it in all kinds of ways, and we can bring in bands, and we can close the kinetic chain, and we can do all kinds of things. But I went to do this single leg circle. And because my hips have been so funky and my knee's a little off and, everything else that's been going on in my body, I really felt it in my quads and in my hip flexors. Now, I have worked with so many teachers and so many clients who are like, but I'm feeling this at the top of my thigh, and shouldn't I just feel this from my abdominals? Well, you know something? Sometimes what's hardest is holding your leg up in flexion and trying to keep your knee relatively straight. Now, could I feel this in other places? Of course I could. I felt it across my shoulder blades where I was keeping my torso steady. I felt it in my abdominals where I was pulling in and up to steady my torso and keep my spine supported. I felt it a little in my hamstrings and the outside of my hips where I was pressing the leg, the non-moving leg down and really kind of working through the center of my body and the back of my body for that. But really, at the end of the day, I hadn't done that exercise in a little while in a full version. And I'd been doing a whole lot of quad and hip flexor strengthening work around my knee. And that particular day, I felt the leg circles all up in my quads and my hip flexors. Now, did I immediately stop and go, oh no, I'm feeling it in the wrong place? No, I didn't. I continued doing the exercise. Now, the sorest part of my leg from the entire Pilates workout was in fact up in my quadriceps. And that's because they're the ones that needed the work at that particular moment. You see, we can't judge the body in that way, okay? If someone's quads need work and they need strengthening, and remember, tight doesn't always mean strong, tight can often mean weak, then your body's going to use that and your body's going to feel those muscles afterwards. They are going to become movers. Now, my upper thigh was not the primary mover. It was not the primary stabilizer, but it was doing a fuck of a lot of work for me in that exercise. And I felt it. And then, because in the ab series and things like that, we have a few more kind of flexion and hip flexion based exercises. Then I did those. I felt those a little more in my abdominals, but I'm sure they helped contribute to the soreness in my upper thigh and hip that I had for a couple of days after that mat. Now, guys, I've been doing Pilates for 35 years. And I have done single leg circles on the mat. I mean, countless times, thousands of times, I'm sure. And this particular time, it was my quad and my upper thigh that clearly needed to do some strength work. And they did some strength work in that exercise. And they were sore. But I could imagine, right, that if I was in, say, a class with a teacher who was very internally focused and interested in what I was feeling, that teacher might have been like, no, that's not where you're supposed to feel the exercise. And if you told me then that I wasn't supposed to feel the exercise where I was feeling it, then I would question everything. Is my body in the right position? Am I doing the right thing? Are my hips correct? What else is wrong here that's making me feel the exercise in the wrong place? And this is also, frankly, how clients get scared, anytime they feel any work in their back muscles. Right? I mean, you've had those clients, right, where you're like, this should be all in your abdominals and not in your back. I've actually even heard teachers say that when clients are doing extension and hyperextension exercises. I don't understand how you expect people to stand up straight or bend backwards and not have that work their back muscles, because you're going into an extension or hyperextension, which is what? A tightening of the back muscles. It's concentrically contracted back muscles at that point. Your abdominals are just stretching and supporting. That's all they're doing in that position. So, it's questionable for us to tell our clients where they should feel an exercise. Another example from my body, which I've used before and which I'm going to use again now, is my right hip, right? I have nerve damage in that right sciatic nerve. I've had shingles on the right sciatic nerve at least like 4 times. And I have an unstable or a sacroiliac instability that mostly affects my right side in terms of, where I get the nerve pain. And sometimes I'll be, say, in a class and I'm doing side kicks or, some variation or modification on the side kicks. And the teacher will say, Lynda, don't you feel where your hip is? It's like hiked up to your shoulder, or it's forward, or it's, and I'll often say, actually, I don't. I don't feel where my hip is because I don't always feel my hip. It's either, frankly, a little bit numb, which is nice, or it's in nerve pain. And then I'll say to the teacher, put my hip in a good position, in relationship to the other hip and my legs and everything else that's working. And then I'll try to maintain that as I move my leg. And that usually works. I can do that sometimes for myself if I'm, working out and I kind of look at where my hips are. I can put my hip in the place that I know it is ideal for the exercise and then try to hold my hip in that position. So sometimes, using these internal cues really confuses the issue for ourselves and our clients. Because if I'm sitting there as a client thinking, well, the top of my thigh is really what I'm feeling when I'm doing these leg circles, and you're trying to tell me that the top of my thigh is precisely not where I should feel the exercise. Or to use an example that I've had for many, many clients, right? If you get a client on the reformer and you get their sacrum heavy, so they're in as close to, a long, stable spine, and their pelvis is not tucked back or tucked forward, but their pelvis is relatively neutral, and you have them on, say, a Gratz with 3 or 4 springs, I can guarantee you that they're going to feel the footwork in their legs, as they should, because, the footwork is pretty much a front squat, except that you happen to be on your back, right? Your feet are forward. Your hips are naturally sitting back because of the position of the bar. And you're going to feel that work in your legs, right? And you can feel it in different places. You can feel it. You can focus on hamstrings. You can focus on, inner thigh. You can focus on, whatever part of the leg you want in terms of talking to clients about the work. But really, at the end of the day, your whole leg's working. You're doing different kind of squats in different positions. So I was working with a new client. I have her on her back on the reformer. She starts doing the footwork and she says, but I didn't think this was for my legs. I thought this was for my powerhouse. And I was like, it kind of is for the powerhouse, because what you're teaching your powerhouse or your core to do is to stabilize your torso as you move against heavier resistance with your lower body, i.e. working your legs. And that's the same, thing that you could, say about a squat or a deadlift or anything else. And she had kind of misunderstood because she had always been cued, once again, that the footwork on the reformer was all about the abdominals and the powerhouse. So she was flattening her lower back and tucking her pelvis under and doing all these machinations to get her body to feel it in her abs. Now, the story gets a little more interesting because this particular client had 2 children and had diastasis recti with both. So realistically, asking her to feel anything in her abdominals was kind of silly because, she was a little bit disconnected from that area. but she would feel things in her back inappropriately if she wasn't doing something correctly or wasn't pulled in enough. And so that's the sign that we would use that she wasn't in the right position, right? Was that she would feel pain in her back, not necessarily work in her back, pain in her back. So these are the things that I want you to be thinking about, right? As you're doing Pilates or you're teaching Pilates or yoga or personal training, is that your client's internal experience of their body is their experience in their body. It does not match yours. And so internal cues that may work perfectly well for you, chances are they're not going to work for other people. They may work for a few of them, but not all of them. So what kind of external cue could you use, say, for something like single leg circles? I could say, look up at your foot and maybe just keep those circles the size of a dinner plate and not go too big so we stabilize the body a little bit more. Okay? And then you're not asking them what they feel. You're just giving them a size. All right, let's go dinner plate size. Or let's go serving platter size, right? I mean, we can kind of work our way up, let's go truck tire size, right? Or reach your leg out toward me, and I'm going to show you with my arm the size that I want you to do. A lot of times in classical Pilates, we'll actually use the apparatus as something to externally cue too. So when you open your legs, we'll say, only go as wide as the reformer frame. Maybe don't go further than that. Or keep your chest over the spring bar. Don't let it go forward. Don't let it move backward. Have your feet in this specific spot on the bar. Right? You don't want to go into a different place. So external cueing can also look like reach your arms up towards the ceiling, reach your arms next to your head. Get your pelvis heavier on the mat. Let your lower back curve. Go into a back bend. Gaze slightly forward and up. Okay? And those are the cues that everyone can understand, right? We want to walk forward, we want our arms in front of us, or I want you to turn your head to the right or left. All good. But how I feel when I'm doing that, in some ways, is meaningless to my actually doing it. Unless, we're in a severe rehab environment. And frankly, unless you're a physical therapist, you're not seeing those people. And we're not physical therapists. When we're in the Pilates studio, when we're working on Zoom, when we're in the gym, when we're in the yoga studio, we are simply personal trainers, Pilates teachers, fitness trainers who are not there to diagnose or to rehab or to fix, okay? So if I say I'm doing chest expansion where I'm kneeling, even if I'm on the mat, and I pull my shoulders back and I turn my head to the right and I turn my head to the left, it hurts a little when I turn my head to the right. Now, if you said to me, you shouldn't feel any pain in your neck when you turn your head, that would kind of be a problem for me. And you know why? Because, as I've mentioned before on the podcast, I have a degeneration in my cervical vertebrae, and it's on the right-hand side. And so typically, if I turn my head to the right, I have a little bit of pain when I do that. It's not a bad thing, and it's not a thing that I need to not do. I've already had this discussion with the neurologist. So telling me from the get-go that I should feel no pain or no restriction when I turn my head right or left is going to leave me, A, confused, and B, not doing an exercise that is actually good for me and is good for my neck. So you see where I'm going here. There's all kinds of ways that we can discuss this. Say you're on the mat, oftentimes when I teach bridge, any kind of bridging, I'll just say to people, lift your pelvis up. Put your pelvis down. Now lift your pelvis up. Think about your knees reaching past your toes. I don't ask them how that feels. I know how that feels. It brings a little more weight into the feet and the ankles. It takes some of the weight off the neck. It might put a little more stretch or a little more kind of strain feeling through the knees, through the front of the hips. And people's bodies will kind of naturally adjust to that as they're doing it. And then bring your hips back down. Again, you don't have to get into how that feels or how it should feel. So I can think back over my career, and I have had clients who were with me for decades who always said, but I don't feel that, or I don't feel that in this place. And finally, 30 odd years later, what I realized is it doesn't matter. For most of the exercises, and for most exercises generally, if someone is doing the exercise with a modicum of form, they're fine. Their body will naturally decrease range of motion or increase range of motion, especially if you're externally cueing them correctly. So the important things then become how you're cueing people to the outside of their body. And frankly, especially for older people who are looking at balance issues and are looking at fall prevention and are looking at, strong bones and staying strong and steady for the rest of their lives, it's much more important to have the external cueing of looking at what's around you in the world as you're walking and doing things and moving your body relative to those things. External cueing, if you're teaching people how to step up on something and step off of something, is going to be important for stairs. It's going to be important to get up and down, on and off a bus, on and off a train. Last year, my husband and I took a train. We took the Amtrak up to Connecticut, and an older gentleman actually fell through the gap between the platform and the train because he missed the step. And here, again, it becomes external. There's the step. Can you lift your leg up high enough to get to it? Can you put that leg down and put weight on it and push off and lift your other leg? And for things like this, how it feels internally, that's almost the last thing you want to think about. I can also think back to kind of before I had my hysterectomy, because I had pretty severe endometriosis, and I used to have a lot of pain when I menstruated. I had pain on ovulation that would, shift side to side every month. That felt literally like somebody was stabbing me right next to my hip bone in my psoas with a hot poker all the time. Now, if you had asked me at any point when I was like exercising or doing things during those years, how it felt internally in my pelvis, well, it felt like shit. It felt horrible. It hurt. But the fact is it hurt anyway. See? And this is what a lot of us are scared of when we start teaching Pilates, is that frankly, a lot of people, especially people over 50, are in a little bit of pain all the time anyway, and it's not necessarily a bad situation. It's something that we kind of just learn to deal with, Your joints get a little stiffer, you get a little arthritis. I was talking about this with a client earlier today. And the worst thing we can do is have our clients become scared to move because they're scared of feeling a certain thing or a certain way. Because sometimes that way that they're feeling has absolutely nothing to do with the movement or nothing to do with what we're telling them. So, when I teach, say, footwork, I just tell people, here's where I want you. And I want your collarbones open, and I want your sacrum heavy. I want your abdominals pulled in a little bit. And then we're going to move this carriage. We're going to straighten your knees and bend your knees without moving your back. That's all. That's all I want. And if you can't do that, then we're going to lighten your spring a little bit till we find a resistance where you can move your legs without moving your back. But all we're doing is straightening your legs and bending your legs. And I can tell you right now that, say you teach larger group classes on the reformer. Maybe you teach at a club Pilates, maybe you teach in a gym, maybe your studio teaches larger group reformer sessions. You should do a poll one day. As people are doing footwork or as people are doing any exercise, the same exercise, with the same amount of resistance, with the same timing and the same instruction, is ask people where they feel it. Just say, hey, where do you feel this? I can tell you right now that people are going to be feeling it in different places. Okay, some people are going to be feeling it in their inner thighs. Some people are going to be feeling their hamstrings. Some people are going to be feeling their calves. Some people are going to be feeling their whole thigh. Some people are going to be feeling the lengthening in their abdominals and their hip flexors. Some people are going to be feeling a little bit of work in their back because they're not used to holding their pelvis steady when they're working against a load. Some people are going to feel it in their neck and shoulders because they're not as stable as they could be and they're shoving up into the shoulder blocks or rounding their shoulders. Like, you're going to discover people feel it all kinds of different places. And guess what? It's all good. It's all okay. Okay, if you're watching them or you're watching yourself and you're in the right position and you're doing the thing correctly, then you feel it where you feel it. Okay, we need to stop focusing on those internal feelings of things and start focusing more on the external of what we want our client to do and how we want our client to perform and move in the world. So that's all I got for you for today. Thank you so much once again for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. And as always, I would love it if you would go over to the Apple Podcasts app, to Podchaser, or to Spotify and leave a rating, and if you would, a written review of the podcast. And I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.